Continuing on our discussion about the digestive functions or the functions of the digestive system, remember that there are 5 stages to digestion. First stage is ingestion, which means that you are actually putting the food into your mouth, into the digestive system, the beginning of the digestive system. Then you have the digestion, which is the breakdown of the food that you've put into your mouth. This is mechanical and chemical breakdown so that these foods or foodstuffs are able to be used by the body, because in their whole form, they are too big, not broken down enough for the body to use it. You then have absorption, so removing those nutrients out of the digestive system and bringing them into the body. You have then compaction, when you take anything that's left in the digestive system and compact it to create feces. And it's done by removing all of the water, so reabsorbing or absorbing all of the water out of the food waste into the body, and then consolidating all of the residual material that is left to form feces. Then defecation is the 5th process, which is where you actually eliminate the feces from the body. So the mechanical digestion is literally when your food is broken down by your teeth. They're physically broken down and the food is ripped into small pieces by your teeth, that physical breakdown of the foods. Not only does it make smaller pieces for your digestive system to be able to, to pass through your digestive system, but it also exposes more of the food surface to enzymes so that the enzymes can break the food down. Remember in lectures past, we talked about surface area. This increases the surface area of the food, so there are more surfaces of the food for the digestive enzymes to attach to, so that the digestive enzymes can continue to break your food down. So again, mechanical digestion is at physical breakdown, tearing food into smaller pieces. Then you have your chemical digestion, that is where those chemicals then go in and help break food down even more into their much, much smaller monomer components. So you have your digestive enzymes produced by different parts of the body. Each digestive enzyme will have a different function. So you have digestive enzymes that are produced by the salivary glands, by the stomach, the pancreas, and the small intestines. And you have different enzymes. One type of enzymes will break down your carbohydrate or polysaccharide materials into monosaccharides. You have your enzymes that will break down proteins into amino acids. You have some that will break down your lipids or fats into monoglycerides and fatty acids. And then you have those that will break down genetic material, nucleic acids, into nucleotides. Some nutrients are then present in a usable form in your ingested food, and it can actually be absorbed immediately. So the vitamins, the amino acids, the minerals, the cholesterol, and the water, if your body recognizes that those nutrients are not, are basically alone, they're not connected to other larger particles, then they can be absorbed directly into the body without having to go through a whole lot of digestion. So what regulates the digestive tract? You have motility and you have secretion. Motility is basically movement. So the word motility literally means movement. The digestive system has rhythm. It has a movement to it, and that is how your food gets from one place to another. The motility of the digestive tract and the secretions of the digestive tract are controlled by several different aspects of, or several different systems in the body. So you have your neural control, which means your nervous system is controlling part of it. This controls both your short reflexes and your long reflexes. Your short reflexes are like your the stretching that occurs, the chemical stimulation that occurs. You can see this in peristaltic contractions. So peristalsis is the wave-like motion that occurs in your digestive tract. You may have felt peristalsis before if you happen to swallow a piece of food that is particularly large, or it hadn't enough saliva had not mixed with it, so that when you swallow, it actually hurts going down. But that feeling where you can actually feel where it is in the esophagus, that's the peristalsis actually moving the food down down the esophagus. And then again, you have that long vasovagal reflex that stimulates motility and secretion of your digestive tract. You have hormones. Remember what hormones are. Hormones are those chemicals that your body produces that are actually secreted into the bloodstream. Once it gets in the bloodstream, it can travel throughout the body, and whichever distal cells that are farther away from the glands that produce those hormones, whichever cells need those chemical messengers, then it'll take it up, and that will act as a stimulant. Not stimulant is the wrong word. It will act to activate that cell to do some job. Gastrin and secretin are two examples of hormones that the digestive tract uses. Gastrin and secretin. Then you have your paracrine secretions. Remember that paracrine secretions are those secretions that don't necessarily need to go through don't necessarily go through the bloodstream to reach the cells that use it. These cells actually move through, diffuse through nearby tissues. So the cells that will work, that will use the hormones, the paracrine hormones, are close to the cells that are actually secreting those hormones. So mastication. Mastication, the word mastication basically means to chew or chewing. Mastication is the act of breaking those foodstuffs down into smaller pieces. When you put it in your mouth, and your teeth, your tongue, your salivary glands, your cheeks, all of those work together in helping the mastication process. So the first step in mechanical digestion is your teeth grinding the food into smaller pieces. When you put food in your mouth, you automatically have a reflex, an involuntary reflex to chew. You can see this in newborns, where they have this reflex to suck. It's a very similar process. When something is put in the mouth, that food will stimulate those receptors in the mouth, and that will trigger the chewing reflex. Your tongue, your buccinator, and your orbicularis oris, all of these muscles are used to move the food around in your mouth so that you can chew at different angles, and you can make sure that you are mashing up the food as well as possible, because you're getting it at different angles. The tongue, we all know what that is. That's a big muscle. The buccinator, you should remember from the muscles chapter, is basically the muscle of the jaw. And then your orbicularis oris is the muscle around your lips that allow you to say, ooh. The masseter and temporalis muscles are also important for mastication. These muscles are important in moving your mouth up to allow your teeth to chomp on your food. And then you have the medial and lateral pterygoids, as well as the masseters, that allow your teeth to move side to side to help grind your food. So think about a cow chewing cud. That is basically the side to side grinding action. And when you are chewing your food, part of the action that you are going through is this this side to side grinding action that allows that helps you chew your food more completely. So saliva is the liquid that is produced by your salivary glands in your mouth. Saliva is not just water, it is several different molecules dissolved in water, and it has several different functions. One of the functions is to moisten your mouth so that you don't have dry mouth. One of the functions is to begin the digestion of your food. So today in class, we talked about salivary amylase. Amylase is the enzyme that starts to break down starch in your mouth. You also have a salivary lipase that does the same thing with fat digestion, breaking down fats. Saliva is also important in cleansing your teeth. It's important in inhibiting bacterial growth. So if you know of, or if you happen to currently have or have in the past had chronic dry mouth where your saliva isn't produced a lot, then people who have that condition are more susceptible to getting things like dental cavities, because you don't have the saliva to actually inhibit bacterial growth, to clean your teeth, and to moisten your mouth. You have several different, hold on, I'm sorry. All right, so saliva helps to dissolve molecules. So the molecules that are in your food, the saliva, they're dissolved in the saliva so that you can actually taste them. It stimulates your taste buds, and because it's dissolved and that saliva then flows across your taste buds, you're allowed to taste your food. And then it binds all the food that has been broken down into one big ball so that you can swallow it more easily. Saliva is hypotonic. Make sure that you're looking that up so that you can remember what hypotonic means. And it has the following solutes in it. So your salivary amylase, we already talked about that. Your lingual lipase, we talked about that a little bit. So again, lipase is the enzyme that breaks down fats. You have your mucus, which is a part of saliva. You have lysozyme. Lysozyme is an enzyme that kills bacteria. So this is important because you know that your food is out in the world and there are bacteria on your food. And so the reason why you don't get sick as often as you potentially could is because you have these lysozyme enzymes in your saliva that help to disable bacteria so that it does not grow and flourish once it gets in the body. You have immunoglobulin A, also known as IgA. This is a protein secreted by your immune system. This is a protein antibody that inhibits bacterial growth. So another way that your immune system is helping to protect you from foreign invaders. And then you have electrolytes. Your electrolytes are, again, charged particles that have different functions in the body. So you have your sodium, your potassium, chloride, phosphate, bicarbonate in saliva. And your saliva pH is somewhere between 6.8 and 7.0. Make sure that you are looking at this diagram so that it helps you to understand the process of swallowing. And when we get back to class, make sure that you are asking questions if you have any questions about the process. So hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is an acid that is produced by cells in your stomach. This acid has a very, very low pH. And because it is very acidic, when it gets into the presence of some of your enzymes, it helps to activate those enzymes. Those enzymes, when they're produced, are not produced in an active form because remember, your body is made up of all of these things. Your body is made up of proteins and fats, etc. So you don't want to just have these enzymes that are going to be chewing you up as your body is producing them. So your body produces an inactive form, and then as when it gets into when the enzyme gets into the stomach, this hydrochloric acid will then come in contact with this inactive enzymes and activate them so that they can then start to break down the foods that they need to break down. Hydrochloric acid will also have a function in breaking up connective tissues of the meats that you eat, as well as plant cell walls. This helps to break things down so that they can be liquefied, and that liquefied form of food is called chyme, or also called chyme. So it just depends on who you are and where you grew up, but that is what that liquefied food is called. Hydrochloric acid also changes iron molecules or iron ions from ferric to ferrous. So it converts them into a different form. Your ferrous ions are then absorbed and it is used for hemoglobin synthesis. So if you had low stomach acid or no stomach acid, you could be in danger of not synthesizing as much hemoglobin as you should. So for example, this is important if a person is, say, taking antacids chronically. They take a lot of antacids all the time. Antacids are anti-acids. They stop your stomach from producing hydrochloric acid. So when that happens, these functions of hydrochloric acid are severely decreased because then you don't have as much hydrochloric acid available to do the job that needs to be done. Hydrochloric acid also contributes to your non-specific resistance. So because it's very acidic, remember I said that if there was not that system of checks and balances in your body, your hydrochloric acid could literally start to eat through your stomach. But because you have checks and balances, you are pretty much safe, but the bacteria, the pathogens that you ingest with your food are not safe, and they can be destroyed with hydrochloric acid. So now let's talk a little bit more specifically about different enzymes in your body. Remember I said that your stomach cells or your, let's start talking about the stomach. So your stomach produces enzymes in their inactive form. It produces the inactive enzymes and then it secretes it into the stomach. It is the hydrochloric acid that will activate it, as I mentioned before. So these inactive proteins are called zymogens. That is the overall term for these inactive digestive enzymes that are then enacted upon by hydrochloric acid to make them active. The way it does that is, so you have these zymogens, and let's say, for example, they have a cap on the end of it. The hydrochloric acid will remove that cap, remove that amino acid, and that will create the active form so that that enzyme can then go about its job. So pepsinogen becomes pepsin. Pepsin is a, excuse me, is an enzyme that digests proteins and makes them into smaller peptides. and the process will continue after the food leaves the stomach, and it continues in the small intestines until that digestion is completed. So one of the zymogens that you will need to know is pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is turned to pepsin in the stomach by being introduced to hydrochloric acid. So lipase is the enzyme that is responsible for breaking down fats into their smaller parts. Gastric lipase, so the lipase that is produced by the stomach, is produced by chief cells. You do need to know that. Chief cells in the stomach produce gastric lipase. Gastric lipase and lingual lipase, so remember, lingual lipase is the lipase that is secreted by the saliva, that is in your saliva, in your mouth. Both of these play a pretty minor role in digesting dietary fats, but they do start the process. So the lingual lipase starts to digest the fats that you eat in your mouth. Gastric lipase will help that process along even more in the stomach, but the majority of the fats that you eat are digested in the small intestine. So only about 10 to 15% of the dietary fats that you intake are digested before it gets into the small intestines. Intrinsic factor is a very important chemical that your body releases. These chemicals, these glycoproteins, are secreted by the parietal cells. Parietal cells are cells that are unique to your stomach. These parietal cells will secrete intrinsic factor, which is extremely important in B12 absorption by the small intestines. So your parietal cells in the stomach will secrete intrinsic factor. Your intrinsic factor will find the B12 in the food that you've just eaten and help that B12 be absorbed into the body in the small intestines. If you don't have intrinsic factor, you're not absorbing as much B12. That can cause anemia. Remember when we talked in the blood chapter, when we talked about different types of anemia? Was it in the blood or cardiovascular? I think it was the cardiovascular chapter. When we talked about different types of anemia, we talked about one of the anemias that was a B12 deficiency. And this is one way that that deficiency occurs. So if a person is having a gastric bypass surgery where they will remove part of the stomach, they can also remove part of your body's ability to absorb B12. That can lend a person to being at increased risk of developing anemia. So even though the stomach can be removed and a person can still digest, that digestion won't be as complete and you won't be able to absorb B12. This is why if you have had, or you know someone who's had has had gastric bypass, then you want to make sure that they are taking a quality B12 supplement, because they need to increase how much B12 they're taking in so that they can assure that they are absorbing as an adequate amount. So talking about gastric motility, gastric motility is regulated by the medulla oblongata. Tongue twister. Medulla oblongata, specifically the swallowing center in the medulla oblongata. This will signal the stomach to relax. So when you are swallowing the food, the medulla oblongata will, again, signal the stomach to relax. The vagus nerve will then relay a message to the medulla oblongata and activate your receptive relaxation response. This will help to resist stretching, but it will allow the more food to be held in the stomach. Remember, I talked about those peristaltic movement, the wave-like motion of your stomach, your digestive system. These are controlled by pacemaker cells in a particular layer of your stomach. So pacemaker cells basically are cells that keep certain pace. We talked about the pacemaker cells in your heart that regulate your heart rate, but now we're talking about pacemaker cells in your stomach that regulate the wave-like movement of your stomach and your digestive system. Peristalsis occurs in ring-like contractions. So you have a ring of contractions every 20 seconds. So you're not looking at me. So what I'm about to do, you can't even see it. So let me just continue. The contractions will become stronger at the pyloric region. So closer to the stomach is where your the ring-like contractions will become a little bit stronger. After about 30 minutes or so, the contractions become even more strong. They will then move your food around, help to mix it with your gastric juices. And that is sort of a mechanical breakdown of the food. That churning action, that constriction will physically mash the food up, which physically helps it to break down while you have chemical digestion going on, because you have these gastric juices and hydrochloric acid present in the stomach. So let's talk a little bit about vomiting. Vomiting is the forceful movement of whatever contents are in the stomach, forcefully moving that out of the stomach through the mouth. The technical term for vomiting is called emesis. So the emetic center is the center in the medulla oblongata that regulates emesis or vomiting. Vomiting can be induced by several different things. You have your overstretching of the stomach or the duodenum, which is the beginning of the small intestines. Chemicals can irritate your stomach that will cause emesis. Those chemical irritants can include things like alcohol or bacterial toxins. So with sidebar, with the bacterial toxins, it's not necessarily the bacteria itself or not just the bacteria itself that can cause you to have illness and whatever symptoms those are. It is the toxins or the chemicals that those bacteria produce. So some of these bacterial toxins can actually produce irritations enough that it causes vomiting. Visceral trauma. So if someone gets hit in the gut, that can cause vomiting. Or if a person has extreme pain or some other psychological or sensory stimuli. So very strong stimuli can induce vomiting. Usually when a person needs to vomit or feels like they need to vomit, it is preceded by nausea and retching. So that's how you know you may be about to vomit, is that feeling of nausea and that retching. Retching occurs when your thoracic region starts to expand, but your abdominal region starts to contract. That increases a pressure difference within the thoracic cavity. And that dilates the esophagus. I want you to go ahead and read the rest of this so that you can understand retching a little bit more, but this is one of the things that precedes vomiting. So read this. If you have questions, we'll talk about it in class. So we talked about your salivary enzymes and your gastric enzymes. There are some that will partially digest protein and starches and fats in the stomach. So when you have that digestion, when you put food in your mouth, you know that the process begins in the mouth, it continues in the stomach. Most of us would assume that all of your food is broken down completely in the stomach. That's absolutely not true. What actually happens is the process is started in the mouth, it is continued in the stomach, but the large majority of the digestion and the absorption will occur in the small intestines after that chyme, that bolus of food has been broken down adequately, mixed with digestive juices and enzymes, and started to pass into the small intestines, where even more enzymes are put into the mix so that it can be continued, the digestion process can be continued. The stomach itself does not absorb any large amounts of nutrients. It can absorb some things like aspirin or like some lipid soluble drugs, but for the most part, absorption happens predominantly in the small intestines. There are a couple other things that are absorbed in the stomach. This is why, again, going back to gastric bypass, if you know anybody who has had gastric bypass, usually they'll be put on something like liquid vitamins, or to be recommended at least, in order to help them to absorb those things better, because their stomach is not doing, because their stomach is no longer there to do the job. But the large part of digestion actually still occurs in the small intestines. Alcohol is mainly absorbed by the small intestines, so that intoxicating effect that you feel is because that alcohol has gotten from the stomach into the small intestines. How quickly that happens depends on how quickly the contents leave your stomach. This is why if you eat before you drink, then you won't get drunk as fast. But if you drink on an empty stomach, you get drunk faster, because the food is literally sopping up the alcohol and causing absorption to be slowed down. I'm going to stop the recording here for now, and I'll continue on the next recording.